Welcome back, listeners, to a new episode of the New Standard. And you are checking out the weekly roundup for the week of February 19th, 2024. And on this show, uh, this is where I jump into more of a detail into the shorts that we did for the show this week. But before we want to jump into that, I want to give a big shout out to my co-host Neil Coulong, who will be joining us shortly back on the show. Neil's taking a little bit of break right now, meditating in Lake Minnetonka. Also, want to send a big shout out to everybody that has liked and subscribed to the program. Please do that. Hit that subscribe button and the like button down below. Please support the program and also spread the word. Tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe to the show. If you want to catch it also via podcast, make sure, however you get your podcast, do a search for Steelers and the New Standard. I want to jump into the latest short that I did from the end of the week because I think the biggest news this week was the waiving of Mason Cole. And after the waiving of Mason Cole, the Steelers, and it's also was announced, I think the cap is going to be 255 million, up 30 million, some odd 30 million, somewhere around there. So the cap is going to be around 255. So the Steelers now find themselves after the transaction with Mason Cole, they find themselves with $9 million of cap space. Looking at the dead money that they have on their books, and dead money reduces the amount of your cap space. So the total dead money that the Steelers are carrying in the 2024-2025 season is 9.5 million approximately. Mitch Trubisky counted in dead money 4.6, Chuck Secor 3 million, Mason Cole 1.5 million, and Kendrick Green $226,000. Now, I like getting into the cap, and we're going to have Ian Whetstone come on the program and break down the impact of the cap jumping so significantly and how that might impact the Pittsburgh Steelers moving forward in terms of their roster construction and what they want to do in free agency. The cap's the cap. It all works itself out. But when I look at the move for Mason Cole being waived, we often talk on this program always about performance, pay, and pedigree. The three P's that when you look at transactions for football team, they always can be broken down within a combination of the three P's: performance, pay, pedigree. Pedigree meaning how you were drafted, how you were obtained by the team in question. Pay, how much you're getting paid. Performance, obviously, is performance. And when a player gets cut, particularly this early, it's clear his performance, Mason Cole, did not warrant the pay. And cap stuff aside, I think the focus always should be on the performance side. When you cut Mason Cole, literally, that leaves a gap in the middle of your offensive line at the center position. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the Steelers do to replace Mason Cole, because you want to be fortified in the center of your offensive line. You want a guy that can make calls, protection calls. You want a guy that is solid in run blocking and pass protection. You can't be compromised in the middle of your offensive line. Mason Cole, I thought, was solid, but I think there is room for an upgrade. Now, the Steelers historically have done very well at the center position. You're talking about Webster, Dermontti Dawson, to just name a few, Marquise Pouncey. So they value centers. They value the interior offensive line much more, in my opinion, than they value tackles. And we're going to talk about the tackles on this particular episode, but they do value tackles because they did take one in the first round. So don't confuse what I'm saying. But historically, I think when you look at the Steelers, Ray Mansfield also is a name you can throw in there. They value centers. They have had very good centers, multiple Hall of Fame centers. When they have done very well as a football team and won games and won championships, they had a center to anchor their offensive line. And presumably, Kenny Pickett's going to be the starter. And the one thing I think you could say about when you have a young starter, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about the tackles, you have to give them a few things. You have to give them weapons. You have to give them a functional scheme in which they can operate at a high level. You have to give them pass protection. And a center is going to be key to pass protection and to keeping your quarterback secure. And I think we see with Kenny Pickett, if he's going to evolve and be the guy that I think the Steelers want him to be, a lot of that is going to hinge on pass protection. So whoever they bring in better be a very good pass protector. And my preference would be they find a center in the free agent market. But given their history and the success that they've had in doing both, obviously, like with Jeff Harding's, in getting a free agent center or drafting one, it's going to be interesting. They do very good, in my opinion, of identifying guys that can play the center position. And right now, that is a big need going into this free agent period and into the draft. I wouldn't be surprised because of Cole being gone and being waived, that center is smack dab in the first round possibilities. We'll jump into some guys that made some comments on a couple of the shorts, mentioned some centers, and we'll jump into that as we get further into the draft season. But it's always comes down to performance, pay, and pedigree. And when those are out of balance and not in harmony, you can see why transactions are made. You can see why player movement happens. Had Mason Cole played better for that price, maybe he's still on the team. Want to jump into another short we did this week. And I asked the question in the short, did Ben Roethlisberger temper the natural mistake aversion of a defensive coach? And that defensive coach in question, obviously, would be Mike Tomlin. And the reason I asked the question is because I'm not sure in today's NFL that a defensive driven head coach can guide you to a championship. I'm looking at the playoff teams from this year: Ravens, Bills, Chiefs, Texans, Browns, Dolphins, Steelers on the AFC side. Now, if you look at that, you have one defensive coach. You have two defensive coaches there. You have DeMeco Ryans and you have Sean McVay. And we've seen the Bills come up short repeatedly. On the NFC side, you have the 49ers, Cowboys, Lions. You have the Buccaneers. You have the Eagles, Rams, and the Packers. Packers, Rams, Eagles, offensive guys. Bucks, defensive guy. Lions, Cowboys, 49ers, you have offensive driven guys. Because I'm saying that Dan Campbell is an offensive guy because he played tight end. So I'm putting him on the side of offense, and because they've produced an offense over the last several years that is ranked top 5 in points per game. And I think I want to ask this question. I want to get some more clarification from you all listeners. Please comment on this one. And if you want to participate in the program and support the program, please hit the like and subscribe button. You are checking out the new standard. The question is, will a defensive coach put the brakes literally on an offense to win games in any way, shape, or fashion? And by doing that, our defensive head coach is more willing to tamper down offense and stunt the development of offense just to win games. It's just weird because winning games is obviously the most important thing. That's what you definitely want to do. But, defensive coaches, it's just basically, you could see a defensive head coach. He's willing to punt the ball all game to put and not take chances if the to keep the game close to give them the best opportunity to win. Now, in a short sample size, that's absolutely great. But over the long haul, I think what it does is when you have defensive head coaches, it stunts and retards the development of offensive football. And I think the reason why the Steelers were able to win was because a defensive head coach didn't really have to deal with the offense at all. He had Ben Roethlisberger. He had Ben Roethlisberger and offensive talent. Thus, he could take more risks that were against his nature because he had a Hall of Famer to do it. Now, I think what we're seeing now is when you don't have a Hall of Famer in Kenny Pickett, you play conservative, you try to keep scores down, scores low, you try to minimize possessions by getting turnovers, and you try to put the game into the hands of the defense by removing the number or minimizing the number of plays that the offense has to make to win the game. That's why I think post Ben Roethlisberger, that's one of the biggest reasons why the Steelers have struggled so much to score points, is because I think you have a defensive minded head coach in Mike Tomlin who's willing to play games like that. Let me switch to another short we talked about. And Steeler Nation was all up in a tizzy this week because of Jerry Dulac. Jerry Dulac, longtime reporter for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, talked about how Kenny Pickett is probably going to be back. And so that sent Steeler Nation just in a tizzy because Steeler Nation right now does not want Kenny Pickett to start. The 3-game sample size of Mason Rudolph playing very good football is obviously enough for Steeler Nation to err on the side of mediocrity at the quarterback's position just because they had 3 good games at quarterback. Like, because quarterback play has been so inconsistent, Steeler Nation has overreacted to those 3 games as if it was Dan Marino playing quarterback. So Steeler Nation was all in a tizzy this week when Dulac made the comments about Kenny Pickett probably returning. Everybody was like, oh, Dulac's wrong. Look, the obligation of Jerry Dulac and Bouchette or Kaboom, Mark Kabali, is not to get it right. It's not to get every report right. They can report on what they've heard or what they've been told. They are not always told the truth. And so, teams send guys smoke screens. You don't have to be right. But what I will say is, in Dulac's defense, he's more tied into any of these guys on the internet. Me, anybody else that does a show. Uh, he's more tied in. So, when guys are ripping him about being wrong, hey, if you're just a fan on Twitter, you don't know shit. I don't know shit. That's why the best thing to do is to report. It's not to try to report news. It's to report on news, not to break news. Report on news. That's it. Whether Dulac is right or wrong, he knows more than you. Hey, man, it's okay. You don't work for the Post-Gazette. You're not on the Steelers beat. You don't have 30 years of relationships. He does. So it's your choice to trust the info, but I'm going to guarantee you, he's more tied in than you. Absolutely. I want to jump into a next short we talked about, and that was do not let the inmates run the asylum. Pause. And this was in response to comments made by Deontay Johnson. And it's already rumored that he might sit in this year again, and that the players want Mason Rudolph to be the starter. Now, I understand, right? Players had some success. But players oftentimes are short-sighted. And the obligation of the player is to put himself in the best position to succeed. And that might not coincide with what the organization feels is best. Now, in this situation, I think the organization is clearly saying it's not worth us seeing what we have in Kenny for short-term success with Mason Rudolph, where we know we have no opportunity to win a Super Bowl with Mason Rudolph. We at least want to see if that is the case with Kenny Pickett. So it doesn't matter what the players want per se. They're going to make stuff that works in their best interest. And what works for the player in their best interest might not be what's best for the football team. It could be incongruent, period. So my thing is trust your GM, the con artist, your head coach, Mike Tomlin, ownership to steer the direction, or excuse me, to steer the team in the appropriate direction. You gotta trust your organization. Now, I know trust has been fractured to a certain extent because the Steelers haven't had a ton of success in the playoffs, haven't had a playoff win since 2016, but players are selfish. Players aren't always looking out for what's best for the organization. And the last short I want to jump into was about Kevin Colbert ripping analytics and the use of analytics in football. And I think he stumbled upon something. I think the key thing that he said is the word use. How are you using analytics? Football analytics in and of themselves are just a tool. They are not a bad thing. But I'm going to give you an example of how using an analytic in a game could be a bad thing. If, let's say, you're trying to make a decision on whether to go for it on fourth down in a certain situation, and analytics say you have a 75%, some algo says you have a 75% chance of converting this third down. However, what analytics might not be taken into account is on the third down, your running back got nicked, and your first string running back got nicked, and you would have to run what you think is a good play in this situation to convert the fourth down. You need your running back that just got nicked. That has to sit out a play. Analytics still say you've got a 74% chance of converting it. However, you have to have the feel to know that in that situation as a coach, yeah, the analytics might be saying 74%, but right now, with running back nicked up, I think it'd be better for us to kick a field goal. So your own judgment as a coach has to anchor this use of analytics. Like you've got to have judgment involved with the decision. Also, he talked about how analytics don't measure intangible things, and he's absolutely right. Analytics don't necessarily measure intangible things about players, but neither do regular counting stats. Coaching, there is nuance in it. We all know that. And you can't simply use analytics to manage a game in real time all the time. But you can leverage analytics, in my opinion, in the construction of your game plan. And you can also use analytics in certain situations during the game. But it's just how you use analytics. It's not that analytics in and of themselves are bad. But with that, We're going to conclude the program. Please like and subscribe, and thank you, and go Steelers.